thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Clay, for sitting down near the front so I can make eye contact. There used to be a family named Sheldon, I think it was, or Shelton, that used to sit right about where you were sitting. Do they attend anymore? Oh, good, because I would always count on them to come in about the time we were getting ready to take up the offering or something like that, and they would come all the way down front. And it was always a joy to see someone coming down so I can preach to them. And that doesn't mean, Kelsey, that on the back row you're not going to get preached at, or over here on this side you're going to get preached at. But anyway, it's a joy to be with you folks again here at Blackstone. Always an honor for having me to come. Now, if you have your Bibles, our scripture reading for this morning is from the 9th chapter of Luke's Gospel. And I am not going to read the entire chapter because it is a lengthy chapter. Friends, I have to tell you, there's a lot going on in chapter 9 of the Gospel according to Luke. So we'll read only in your hearing this morning from verses 28 through 36. Luke chapter 9, verses 28 through 36. May we hear reverently God's word. And it came to pass, about in 8 days after these sayings, he took Peter and John and James, and went up into a mountain to pray. And as he prayed, the fashion of his countenance was altered, and his raiment was white and glistening. And behold, there talked with him 2 men, which were Moses and Elias. Now, Luke says Elias, but that is the prophet Elijah, as we know him from the Old Testament. They appeared in glory, and spake of his decease, which he should accomplish in Jerusalem. They were talking with Jesus about the coming crucifixion. But Peter and they that were with him were heavy with sleep. And when they were awake, they saw his glory, and the 2 men that stood with him. And it came to pass, as they departed from him, Peter said unto Jesus, Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 tabernacles, 3 tents, 3 altars, one for thee, and one for Moses, and one for Elias. That's what he said. When he thus spoke, there came a cloud and overshadowed them, and they feared as they entered into the cloud. And there came a voice out of the cloud, saying, This is my beloved Son, hear him. And when the voice was past, Jesus was found alone. And they kept it close, and told no man in those days any of those things which they had seen. And God add his blessing once again to the reading and the hearing of his word. It is always an awesome responsibility to stand and talk about Jesus and who he was and how he revealed himself not only to his disciples, but how he continues to reveal himself to you and me each and every day. His Shekinah glory. Many times in our lives, we find ourselves discouraged or unsure what the future might hold, what experiences lie before us. Now, on this Mount Hermon, and this is Mount Hermon near Caesarea Philippi, which would be modern-day Syria, this is where this took place. Jesus had taken his disciples aside, Peter, John, and James, the 3 of them. By the way, in Mark's Gospel and in Matthew's Gospel, they say Peter, James, and John. But Luke says Peter, John, and James. Why there's a difference in the order, I'm not sure. But it's a little distinction there, just for note. But Jesus had taken them into the mountain, Mount Hermon, to pray. So when you and I have our concerns, maybe you and I should draw aside to pray and seek God's will. For it was on this occasion when Jesus knew that just about 4 months from this occasion, he would be taken before Pilate. He would be taken before the Jewish council. And he would be tried and convicted and crucified to death. And he was seeking his friends in this world to go with him to be a consoling factor for him as he prayed to his Father in heaven. And then God sent Moses and Elijah also to be with him and to give him assurance that God would be with him, the Father would be with him as he endured what was coming his way with the trial and the crucifixion, and indeed following the resurrection. So this was a time when Jesus knew what lay ahead and he sought consolation from others. When each of us has our own problems or our own concerns, we need to seek those around us that we know will give us the kind of consolation, the kind of answer, the kind of support that we would like to have. And that, maybe I should say that we need, not maybe that we would like to hear, but that we really need. And this is what Peter, John, and James in the flesh, in the human form, what they offered to Jesus on Mount Hermon. And when they experienced this epiphany of the Shekinah glory of God. Now, you are aware, if you've been in Sunday school very many years, or you've been attending church for many years, you know that Shekinah is the Hebrew word that really talks about the beautiful, glowing grace of God that is there for us to behold. Moses on Mount Sinai beheld the Shekinah glory of God, and it shone in his face after coming in contact with the presence of God, the Shekinah glory of God. And there on Mount Hermon, when Jesus came into the presence of God and Moses and Elijah, his garments became as white and glowing as it could be, and his face was transfigured. And it was a difference, and Peter, John, and James recognized that difference. Now on this mountain, let me point out that there were at least 5 people present. 6 people present. 7 if you count Father in heaven. Because he was there in the end in the cloud and spoke about his son Jesus. That is, the Father did. But the personalities that were involved on this Mount of Transfiguration, or Mount Hermon, which was in near Caesarea Philippi, modern-day Syria, Moses and Elijah, the Bible tells us, were there. Now, who are Moses and Elijah? I've already alluded to Moses, how he came in contact with God on Mount Sinai when he received the 10 Commandments, the law of God. By the way, on Jeopardy this past week, there was one of the answers that was given was the first book of the Torah. Do you know what the first book of the Torah is? The first book of the Torah is, say it louder, Genesis. You know what they said on Jeopardy? The Talmud. The answer was, what is the Talmud? Our generation today doesn't even know what the... I won't go there today because that's not my sermon today. It's the glory of God today, not the problem in our world. Moses was there, representing the law. God had given Moses the law, the 10 Commandments, if you will, on Mount Sinai. And there he had that encounter with God as God gave him those 10 Commandments, or the 10 words as they literally were. And we translate them into the 10 Commandments, beginning with, thou shalt have no other God before me. That was the law Moses represented. This is the same Moses that was not only there on Mount Sinai, he was the Moses that came down and saw that a molten calf had been made to an idol god, and he took that and cast it aside, and really he chastened his brother Aaron for having been a part of this, forming this golden calf that was down at the foot of Mount Sinai. This is the same Moses that when he died, the last of Deuteronomy, the last part of the book of Deuteronomy says, God took the body of Moses and buried him, and no one knows where he is buried to this day. That was when Luke was writing, some 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years later, we still don't know where he was buried. Now, the second person that we are told was there on Mount Hermon, the Mount of Transfiguration, was Elijah. Elijah represents the prophets, the major prophets, the minor prophets, all of those who came and spoke on behalf of God, telling the people about what would come to them if they did not repent and turn to God. He represented the prophets. Elijah was that man that he had a lot of trouble with some woman by the name of Jezebel. Ever heard of her? He had a little trouble with the prophets of Baal because they said, if you really are a prophet of God, we want some proof of it. He said, all right, you build an altar to your God and see if your God can start a fire. I'll build an altar to Almighty God Jehovah, and we'll see if he can start a fire on the altar. They built their altars, and they danced around it. The Bible says in 1 Kings, they began to strike themselves, scratch themselves. They bled all over the place, but no fire came down. Elijah gets up and he prays to God, if you be the God, we pray that you will send fire down to lap up the water around my altar and make the burnt offering for yourself. And fire came down from him. That's the Elijah that was here with Jesus. It's the same Elijah. Like Moses, he had really a different kind of, a distinctive kind of death because we don't know where he's buried. Elijah had a distinctive kind of death. Actually, he didn't die. You know what happened to Elijah? Some Bible students tell me what happened to Elijah. He was taken in a whirlwind in a chariot of fire. Now, somebody said that might have been the first alien that came in, the spaceship came and took him up. I don't know. I don't think so. I think it was God's Holy Spirit that took Elijah. But you see the similarity between Moses. Moses, the man of God who was the lawgiver, but yet had a strange, different kind of death and burial. Elijah, the prophet of God, who prophesied that God would come down in fire, which he did, and he was taken up in a chariot of fire, representing all the prophets who came after him, and even till today. They were there. And I'll say more in a minute maybe, but you know what? When they appeared to Jesus, with Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration, and Peter, James, and John was there, did it say anywhere in what I read? And it does not. I'll answer that question. It doesn't say over in the 7th chapter of Mark or the 17th chapter of Matthew when we get to the same story. It doesn't say that Peter, James, and John woke up and said, "That's Jesus. Who in the world's there with him? We don't know." Did it say that? When they recognized Moses and Elijah. Moses had been dead, I think I have it written here somewhere, he'd been dead over 1,500 years. And they recognized him. Elijah had been dead over 900 years, and they recognized him. This was no accident. There was no question in their mind who was there. It's interesting that both of these men, Moses and Elijah, were special in the history of Israel. And they were there with Peter, James, and John. These three disciples, they represent the gospel of the new covenant. You see, we have the law, the prophets, and now the new covenant. The blood atonement of Jesus Christ. Because Peter writes about it. The gospel of Mark, so we're told by Bible students, the gospel of Mark is really the gospel of Peter. Because Peter takes John Mark, who was the nephew of Barnabas, and he tells him all about what happened and how these things came to be, and Mark puts them down. Mark had a better control of Greek, I guess, than Peter did, because Mark wrote it down in Greek, what we have recorded about that. Not only did Peter write about it, but also John wrote about it, and I could be reading some of these texts, and I have them marked. Let me read what Peter said over here about this, not only in the gospel, but in 1 Peter chapter 6 and verses 16 through 18, 2 Peter 16 through 18. I got 1 Peter 6. It's 1 Peter 6. My typewriter's wrong. Anyway, he talks about the one that we saw on the mountain. Peter talks about that in his epistle that he wrote. That we were there on the mountain and we beheld his glory, the Shekinah glory. And John talks about it in the 20th chapter of the book of John. He talks about all of these things that I have written and told you about. These are the things that we know about the Messiah, the Christ of God. And we declare unto you. And he goes on to say, if everything were written about Jesus that we could write, not even the world could contain what we could tell about Jesus. These apostles, these disciples that were there on the Mount of Transfiguration, they went on to talk about what a wonderful experience they had there with Jesus on the mount. Peter was a rock. Jesus said, "On this rock I will build my church." This also takes place in this chapter 9 of Luke's Gospel. Jesus comes back after the disciples have returned from preaching, teaching, casting out demons, and healing the sick. And he gets them all together. Now he said, "Okay, tell me, who's everybody saying that I am?" And they say, "Well, some say you're Elijah, one of the prophets." Elijah here. Some say that you're Jeremiah, one of the prophets. Some say that you're John the Baptist come back again. That's what Herod was afraid of, that he was John the Baptist come back again after he had him beheaded. And then Jesus puts the question to his disciples. This is in the 9th chapter of Luke. I told you there's a lot going on in that chapter. He said, now, who do you say that I am? And Peter steps up and says, you're the Christ of God. And that's when Jesus said, you're right. You've not been told by anything in this world, but my Father has revealed it to you. And on this rock, on your confession of faith, and on all of your belief, I will build my church. This happened just before the Mount of Transfiguration experience, when Jesus took them aside to pray, by the way. He'd already prayed 2 other times. He called his disciples and he prayed with them as they went out. He prayed over the feeding of the 5,000. That's also in chapter 9. And then he prayed with them on the Mount of Ascension. The Mount of Transfiguration. Prayer was important to Jesus. If I may make an interjection here, let me tell you why it's important. After this wonderful experience that Peter, James, and John, along with Jesus and Moses and Elijah, had on the Mount Hermon, Transfiguration, they go down the mountain. Getting ahead of myself in the story, but they go down to the mountain. What do they find? There's a man with a son who has a problem. He's epileptic. And the man comes to Jesus when he recognizes him, and he said, all your disciples here, they couldn't cast this demon out of my son. They couldn't do anything to heal him and make him well. What did Jesus do? He made him well. He healed him. And then just a few minutes after that, the disciples got him and said, Master, so you cast out that demon. You made him well. Why couldn't we do it? We tried. Oh, how we tried, but we couldn't do it. And Jesus said, you're not prayed up. He said, this kind can only be cast out by much prayer. What had Jesus done? He had already prayed 3 times. He was prayed up. While he was praying on the Mount of Transfiguration with Moses and Elijah, what were Peter, John, and James doing? And the other disciples, they were no better. They were down there trying to do it in their own power, but they weren't prayed up. They didn't have the power of God to do it. But now listen. What had Jesus told the disciples? All of them, all 12 of them, back over in the first few verses of chapter 9. I didn't read it to you, but if you go back and look at it, by the way, after the service is over today, you go home and you have your chicken, get the book of Luke out and read chapter 9 all the way through. Jesus told them when he sent them out, he said, you go and you preach and you teach and you heal. Heal the sick. And they had not been able to do it. Why? Because they weren't prayed. If we are going to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ in all of his Shekinah glory, all of his blood-shedding forgiveness, we need to be prayed up ourselves. If we're going to talk about what's evil in the world today and how Satan is making headway in the world today, in our schools, in our public, and everywhere else in government, we need to be prayed up ourselves so God can strengthen us and give us the power. The disciples missed out on that. Jesus had told them, he said, you're going to preach and teach and heal the sick. But they weren't ready for it just yet. By the way, I'm talking with my wife on the way here, going over some of these ideas. This is not in my notes, but it was in my mind. You remember one of the last appearances that Jesus made to the disciples? What were they doing? Fishing. And Jesus hollers out to Peter and the other disciples in the boats out on the Sea of Galilee. Have you caught anything? No, sir. We fished all night. Haven't caught a thing. Throw your nets on the other side. And I can imagine Peter, James, John, Andrew maybe was there with the other fishermen. They said, we've been here all night. We're fishermen. We know what we're talking about. Who's that guy out there trying to tell us what to do? But nevertheless, they did it. They threw the nets on the other side, and what happened? They began to draw in a lot of fish. Was it 52 or 53? Is that what the Bible said? It's one of the 52 or 53. 52, I think, that they drew in. And then when Peter turned and looked at this man on the shore who had been telling him to throw your nets on the other side, he looked at him, and who did he see? The Shekinah glory. I got to believe that. The Bible doesn't, John doesn't record that in the account. But I got to believe that when Peter turned, he didn't recognize the voice maybe, but when he turned and he saw that image of Jesus, he saw that Shekinah glory that he saw on Mount Hermon. Do you believe that? Could that have been that way? I don't know. The Bible doesn't say. I'd like to think it happened that way. He recognized it nonetheless. And then he challenged him to feed his sheep. You love me, Peter, more than everything you see here. Do you love me? Then go feed my sheep. 3 times he asked him that. It's interesting that, now this is not part of the sermon either. I got 5 more minutes, so give me a leeway here. But when Peter said, Lord, you asked me 3 times now to feed the sheep, and I'm going to do that, but what about this guy over here? See, John was standing over there listening. He said, I'm going to do that. What you got in store for John? Jesus, what did Jesus say? Hey, you don't worry about him. If he hangs around till I come again, that doesn't make any difference to you. You do what I told you to do. Go feed the sheep. Sometimes don't we get hung up in worrying about what somebody else is going to do, and we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing? Wow. Go feed the sheep, Jesus said. If I get back on track here. James. We know what happened to Peter. He was crucified upside down after becoming the great preacher, the great leader of that early church. John, we know, lived a long time, maybe near 100 years, on the island of Patmos. Wrote the book of John, Revelation there. 1st, 2nd, 3rd John probably also. Long time. James didn't live so long. Herod didn't like what James was preaching. James, according to the tradition, James didn't get very far outside Jerusalem. He did his teaching and preaching around Jerusalem. Herod didn't like it. So Herod says, first officer, as a man out here talking about Jesus and what we did to him a few years ago, I don't like what he's saying. You go bring him to me and we'll have him beheaded. AD 40, according to the tradition, James's head was because Herod didn't like him. We know about Peter and John. They lived a little bit longer, had a little bit more of a testimony. And don't you think that James had that testimony in Jerusalem, or else Herod wouldn't bother with it? It's whoever makes the most noise is whoever's going to catch the most problem. And James had to be making a lot of noise there in Jerusalem about the Messiah. Let me tell you a little bit about the preeminence of Jesus. I really have 3 points here. It's the personalities involved, the preeminence of Jesus, and the positive recognition. And if we get to these, what time do they quit eating at the Herb Cottage?
3 o'clock.
3 o'clock. Well, we won't get that. The preeminence of Jesus. Jesus could blend the past, Moses and Elijah, with the present and look to the future because he was the past, the present, and the future. He is Jesus, the Messiah, the anointed of God that came down from heaven, and his Shekinah glory shone there on Mount Hermon, the Mount of Transfiguration, where the past, the present, and the future, his crucifixion, all came together. That was the importance of Jesus right here. He had come from glory, and he was sharing his glory, and we know in the 2nd chapter of Acts, he returns to glory on that heavenly cloud. Jesus, Moses, and Elijah are the 3 recorded in the Bible who spent how many days in the wilderness, Mike? 40 days. I preached a sermon similar to that some years ago here at Blackstone Baptist Church, and when I had Moses and Elijah and Jesus in the wilderness, I said they spent 30 days together. Now, Mike was gracious enough, he didn't raise his hand and say, hey, you're wrong, preacher, until after the service. Then he comes up and says, wasn't that 40 days? Maybe you didn't even do that, but it was 40 days that they spent together. The only 3 people in the Bible that spent 40 days in the wilderness praying and fasting, and here they are together on the Mount of Transfiguration. Jesus was at the center of this convention. It was he who went up there to pray. He began to pray, and then he was transfigured first. His body became a glorious glow. And then Moses and Elijah come and join him in this glorious heavenly Shekinah. And then all of a sudden Peter, James, and John, and James, they were awakened from their sleep and they saw what a wonderful experience it must have been. Has there ever been someone in your life that was a shining glory for you in your pilgrimage for Christ? Or have you ever been like that to someone else, where you have been a shining example to them, a Shekinah glory for them in their pilgrimage? 2 years ago, last month, Pat went with me, but I had the opportunity to go to Birmingham, Alabama, Actually, we had a meeting in Trussville, Alabama, just kind of east of Birmingham, at the Trussville Baptist Church. You know where that is, Lee. It was a reunion of the church that I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. The one where I was saved and baptized and called into ministry, which that church no longer is in existence. They sold out to an African-American congregation. But they had a reunion 2 years ago, and they had another one this year, but I didn't make it this year. But 2 years ago, I went. There were two people of interest that were there at that reunion of West End Baptist Church that meant a lot to me in my pilgrimage as a young lad and into the ministry. Well, at least two in the church, and then one I'll tell you about later. There was a woman named May McDonald. She's still alive to this day. She's 97, 98 years of age now. She was 95 2 years ago when we were there. Walking with a rollator, but she lives alone and takes care of herself, and her mind is very sharp, and although she has to have something to help her walk, May McDonald was at that reunion. Do you know she was a lady that asked me when I was 11 years of age, GC, has anyone ever told you about Jesus and how you need to be saved? And I said, no, ma'am. She said, well, let me tell you, you need Jesus in your heart. She said, the preacher in my house, they led me to the Lord and baptized me. James Butler. His son's now a preacher. Saw him 2 years ago as well as his daughters that were there. May McDonald, my mama in the ministry, I like to call her. My mama in the faith. And she's still alive to this day. There was a young man there. His name was Joe Lawley. As far as I know, Joe Lawley's still dead. He was not able to make it still alive. He's not able to. Sorry about that. This Mustang. 2 years ago, he was not able to make it because of his health. But he was still alive. And he was my RA leader. Like, didn't Dr. Bradshaw say that Mac Williams was his RA leader years ago? Joe Lawley was my RA leader, and because of the mission stories that I learned from Joe Lawley and the steps that we went through, the Page, Knight, Squire, Ambassador Extraordinary, Ambassador Clinic, I'm not sure I'm saying that. But all of the steps. Joe Lawley was my father in ministry, and it was because of Royal Ambassadors that I felt God calling me to missions and to the ministry. These two shining lights in my path. But there was a third person, not a member of West End Baptist Church. He had been interim pastor at West End Baptist Church on a couple of occasions. His name was Dr. Sigurd Bryant, college professor of mine. You learn from college professor too, Kelsey, before long that there will be shining light for you. Dr. Bryant, saintly kind of guy, always walked around very deliberately, very cautiously, never had a whole lot to say unless you asked him. I have to tell you this. His name was Sigurd, S-I-G-U-R-D. We call him Sacred, Dr. Sacred Bryant. Not to his face. But in the hallway, people, you got a class of Sacred Bryant this year? Yeah, I got a class of Sacred. Let me tell you something. He was a sacred individual. He was at this reunion of West End Baptist Church with his bride, who was one of his students when he was a professor. He's retired now, of course. He was in a wheelchair. He couldn't walk, but he was in a wheelchair, and his young bride was rolling him around. And we were standing in line to get to talk to Dr. Bryant. I walked up and shook his hand. I said, Dr. Bryant, you may not remember me, but I was in one of your... I remember you, GC. And I want you to know that I pray for you and Pat every day at missionary. Man, after how many years was that? We've been married how many years? 70? 49. It'll be 49 next week. 49. Hey, 49 next week, right? 49 years next week we'll be married. But this guy said my professor remembered after 60 years and 55 years. He remembered me by name and said he prayed for me on the missionary prayer calendar. That's the kind of Shekinah glory that I had in my past that is partially responsible. God's basically responsible. But all of these people around me that were shining examples that supported me and helped me along the way, that's my Shekinah glory in my life. And I hope we can be that for others somewhere along the way. Now, bring this to a conclusion. I have time. The positive recognition. Now, I don't want to go into a lot of detail about this, but I told you that Moses and Elijah had been dead for a long time. But they were recognized. When we die and get to heaven, are we going to recognize those who've gone on before us in the Lord? I think so. Now, it won't be, I'll see Lee when we get there, but I won't remember him as the guy over here at the convention center or as a Sunday school teacher. Like, he's my brother in the Lord. We're joint heirs with Christ. He's my Shekinah brother in heaven. He's transfigured in heaven. And that's the way we will be when we get to glory. We won't be the same body. We'll be transfigured, transformed, changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, Paul said. Yes, I think we will recognize him. Then, no question about the reality of this event. And it did happen, it happened before the resurrection. Some have tried to say, well, after the resurrection, his body did have a certain glow. No. This happened before he was arrested and tried and crucified. And they were all recognized. And the disciples, when they woke up, they said, let's put three tabernacles here. We're going to worship together. You, Moses, and Elijah. Jesus said, that's not why we're here. We're here for the building up of our spirits, that we might be better servants of the living God. And about that time, a cloud comes over. And they're taken up in the cloud. Not taken up, but a cloud comes upon them. And they hear this voice. Some say it's thunder. Hey, you remember who John and James were? What was their daddy called? They were the sons of... Isn't that interesting, Lee? The sons of thunder heard it thunder, but it wasn't really thunder. As if their daddy had spoken, boys, get out there and get your fishing. This was the heavenly Father saying, hey, God, this is my son, in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him. Hear him, what he's got to say. And if we're not listening to Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God, that's the kind of glory today. Shame on us. Shame on us.
I'm asleep.
2 or 3 more stories. I'm going to close with this.
Okay.
You want to know more? See me after lunch. In October 1981, go back a month or two. October 1981, I caught an airplane in Atlanta, Georgia to fly to Richmond, Virginia. Patty and I had just been appointed as your Southern Baptist home missionary there in Atlanta, home mission board. Caught the plane back home. Little did I know that I was in the Shekinah glory presence of the saints of the day. Now, this is another generation. They may not mean too much to you, but Ruby, you're old enough to remember some of it. Did I get in trouble saying that? Remember the name Carolyn Weatherford? Used to be executive director of Women's Missionary Union. Bill Tanner, who was president or executive director of the Home Mission Board at that time. He had just shaken my hand the night before. Welcome as a home missionary. He and Carolyn Weatherford were on that plane. The Brotherhood director of the Southern Baptist Convention, Wayne, where are you? He was on that plane. I can't remember his name. But Keith Parks was on that plane. Remember the name Keith Parks? Executive director of the then Foreign Mission Board here in Richmond, Virginia. Man, these luminaries, these Shekinah glory people on that plane. First thought I had was, God, this plane ain't going to crash. You got too many saints on board here. We're going to make it to Richmond. And we did, but I got to thinking about that. Lord, you have put me on this airplane with my heroes of the day. The Foreign Mission Board, the Home Mission Board, WMU, Brotherhood. We're all there together in the Shekinah glory of God. And I'm here today to tell you that this story brought me to where I am in your presence today. It fed me along the way, spiritually speaking. Are we the Shekinah glory of some that are looking to us for an example? Someone to say, I knew that person and I want to be like them in the faith. Or are you saying, I remember, and probably each of us here today can remember someone, some person, some event, some church that made a difference in our life. It sure did in Peter, James, and John, didn't it? That Shekinah glory of Jesus. And God add his blessing to this.